The vial slid from the lining of Willow's handbag and hit the tile with a soft plastic knock that sounded louder than any gunshot ever could. Liz froze as the label caught the light. She did not need to read every word to know what it was. Her breath stalled. Her mind raced. And in that instant the picture she had refused to see finally locked into place. Drew lay upstairs fighting for a future that might never return. And the woman sobbing the hardest for him had been carrying the poison that stole his breath. General Hospital spoilers teases that Willow had convinced herself she was untouchable. She believed her performance was flawless. That grief could be worn like armor, and that sympathy would erase suspicion. She played the role with trembling hands and red-rimmed eyes, letting the town gather around her as if she were the most wounded soul in the room. For a time it worked. The verdict came back clean. The courtroom exhaled. Willow walked free. In her mind the story was finished. But stories never end just because a judge says so, especially when too many pieces are left scattered on the floor. There were at least 3 people who knew the truth about the night Drew was shot. Kai knew because he had been there when whispers still clung to the walls. Trina knew because she had learned to read Willow's silences better than anyone else. Alexis knew because lies leave a residue, and she had spent a lifetime studying it. Each of them understood that Willow pulled the trigger. Each of them chose to keep that knowledge locked away. The trial was over. Double jeopardy closed the door. Without new evidence, they could not touch her for the shooting. And none of them mourned that fact. In their eyes, Drew had earned enemies through cruelty and manipulation, and fate had merely circled back. Yet freedom is fragile when it rests on secrets that refuse to stay buried. The 3 who knew about the gunshot also understood something else. Drew's collapse did not fit the story of recovery. The stroke came too fast, too clean, too perfectly timed. It arrived only hours after the verdict, after champagne flutes clinked and Willow smiled through tears at a celebration that felt rehearsed. Even then they said nothing, telling themselves coincidence was still possible. Silence was safer. Silence felt justified. The person Willow never planned for was Liz. Liz was not an enemy, not a rival, not someone standing on the other side of the courtroom aisle. Liz was a friend. Liz had held Willow's hand through long nights and believed the version of her that needed saving. She knew about the plan to marry Drew. The rushed vows meant to drape respectability over chaos. Liz understood the logic Willow offered. That marriage would quiet the police and wrap Drew in a public promise that made suspicion seem cruel. Liz accepted that explanation because she trusted Willow's heart. Liz also knew Willow did not love Drew. She knew it the way friends know the truth without needing proof. Willow could not forgive him for sleeping with her mother Nina. That betrayal had carved a wound that never healed. Willow spoke of forgiveness, but her eyes hardened whenever Drew's name came up. Liz believed Willow's anger had limits. She believed vengeance would stop at distance and silence. She never imagined it would end with a bullet. When Drew was rushed to the hospital, Willow's reaction unsettled Liz in ways she could not immediately name. Willow wept as if the world were ending. She clung to nurses. She begged doctors. Her grief spilled over every boundary. When Lucas explained that Drew had suffered a stroke and might never regain his strength, Willow's cries grew louder, more desperate, almost theatrical. It was the excess that cut through Liz's denial. Love that intense did not exist between them. If anything, Willow had spoken of Drew as a necessary evil. Watching her unravel, Liz felt the first chill of doubt. Doubt turned into memory. Memory into pattern. Liz replayed the timeline with a nurse's precision. Drew had been shot, and the real shooter vanished into the dark. Hours after Willow was declared innocent, Drew collapsed at home. At that moment, only 2 people were present. Drew and Willow. The coincidence pressed too hard to ignore. Liz did not accuse. She observed. She listened. She waited. Working at the hospital gave Liz access to truths most people never see. She managed medications alongside others who trusted her judgment. She knew the counts. She knew the logs. Late one night, she noticed a discrepancy that should not exist. A vial was missing, a compound potent enough to cause catastrophic damage if misused. It was not the kind of medication that wandered off by mistake. The omission was small on paper, enormous in consequence. Liz felt her stomach drop as understanding settled in. She thought of Lucas and the initial tests he had run on Drew. They focused on trauma, on stress, on the obvious causes. No one had looked for poison because no one suspected it. Now Liz had a reason. She approached Lucas carefully, framing her request as concern rather than accusation. She asked for a deeper analysis, a second look at Drew's blood with the missing compound in mind. If traces appeared, there would be no hiding from the truth. While the lab work moved forward, Liz kept watching Willow. She noted the way Willow hovered, yet never quite touched Drew. She noticed how questions came wrapped in tears, how every display of devotion seemed calibrated. Liz searched for a sign of guilt and found something colder. Calculation disguised as sorrow. The friend she thought she knew began to feel like a stranger wearing familiar clothes. The discovery of the vial happened by accident, or so it seemed on the surface. Willow's handbag lay open on a chair as Liz entered the room. A movement, a shift, and the lining gaped just enough. The vial slipped free. The label matched the missing inventory. Liz's hands shook as she picked it up. Willow had thrown away the syringe, confident that the weapon was gone. She had forgotten the container that mattered most. Liz did not scream. She did not confront Willow in a burst of anger. She did what she had always done best. She gathered facts. She called the police and reported exactly what she had seen, what she knew, and why it mattered. She explained the timeline, the missing medication, the suspicious stroke. She handed over the vial and trusted the process she once believed Willow had beaten. As sirens drew closer, the lab results came back. Lucas stared at the screen, his face draining of color. The compound was there, unmistakable in Drew's blood. The stroke was not random. It was induced. Every excuse Willow had built collapsed under the weight of chemistry and timing. The room filled with noise, questions overlapping, officers stepping in with practiced calm. Willow's tears returned, but they sounded different now, sharper, edged with fear. Liz watched from the doorway, heart heavy with grief for the friend she had lost and the truth she could no longer protect. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, waiting for what would come next, as Drew's fate and Willow's future hung suspended in a silence that promised anything but peace. Willow felt the room tilt as the officers closed in, their presence draining the air of every illusion she had carefully constructed. For a moment she still tried to hold on to the role she had played so well. Her shoulders shook, her voice trembled, and she clutched her chest as if grief alone could shield her. But this time no one rushed to comfort her. No one told her it would be all right. The truth had weight now, and it pressed down on everyone standing there. Liz did not step forward. She stayed where she was, rooted to the doorway, watching the woman she once defended unravel under a gaze that no longer saw innocence. There was no satisfaction in this moment for Liz, only a deep exhaustion. She had replayed the signs too many times already. The exaggerated grief, the timing, the missing medication, every detail had dragged her closer to a conclusion she never wanted to reach. Now that it had arrived, it felt heavier than she imagined. The police spoke calmly, asking Willow to sit, to breathe, to answer a few questions. Willow obeyed at first, still believing she could cry her way through this as she had done before. She insisted it was a misunderstanding. She said anyone could have taken the vial. She said Liz must be wrong. Her words came fast, layered with panic, and yet beneath them ran a current of calculation. Willow was already searching for angles, for cracks in the wall closing around her. Lucas stood near the monitors, staring at Drew through the glass as if seeing him for the first time. As a doctor, he had been trained to accept outcomes, even devastating ones. As a man, he struggled with the knowledge that he had nearly missed the truth. He turned when the officers asked him to explain the lab results. His voice was steady, clinical, devastating. The compound was present. The dosage aligned with the timing of the stroke. There was no doubt left to hide behind. At that moment, something inside Willow finally fractured. The tears stopped mid-sob. Her face hardened, and her eyes flicked toward Liz with an expression that was no longer pleading but accusatory. Betrayal burned there, raw and furious. Liz felt it like a physical blow. This was not the look of a wronged friend. It was the look of someone whose game had been exposed. "Why did you do this?" Willow demanded. Her voice was low, stripped of the theatrics she had relied on. "You knew what would happen if you spoke up." Liz answered quietly, "Because Drew deserved the truth. Because you went too far. Because I could not pretend anymore." The officers moved then, placing Willow under arrest for poisoning and attempted murder. The words echoed through the room with finality. This was no longer about suspicion or rumor. It was about evidence. Willow resisted just long enough to make her distress unmistakable, then allowed herself to be led away. As she passed Liz, she leaned close and whispered that this was not over. That nothing ever really ends in Port Charles. News traveled fast. By morning, the hospital buzzed with whispered conversations and shocked reactions. Kai heard first and closed his eyes as if bracing for impact. Trina felt anger surge alongside a grim sense of validation. Alexis sat alone in her office long after hours, staring at the city lights and thinking about how easily justice can be delayed but never completely denied. All three understood that their silence had not stopped the truth. It had only changed the path it took to surface. Drew remained unconscious as the world shifted around him. Machines breathed and beeped, keeping time with a life that refused to let go. Doctors spoke carefully about prognosis and recovery, about possibilities that depended on strength and luck. There were no guarantees. Yet there was a quiet resilience in Drew that surprised even those who knew him best. He had survived a gunshot. He was now surviving betrayal layered on betrayal. Liz visited his room late at night when the corridors were quiet. She spoke to him even though she did not know if he could hear. She told him the truth had come out. She told him she was sorry for every moment she doubted herself. She told him that whatever happened next, he would not be facing it in the dark. As she left, she paused at the door, allowing herself one breath of relief before returning to a world that felt altered but honest. Willow spent her first night in a holding cell staring at concrete walls. Without an audience, her thoughts grew louder. She replayed every decision, every calculated tear, every lie she had convinced herself was necessary. In her mind, Drew was still the villain. Nina was still the source of humiliation. The town had forced her hand. She clung to that narrative because without it she would have to face something far more terrifying. That she chose this path willingly. Her lawyer arrived the next day, already outlining strategies and potential defenses. Willow listened but barely heard. She had won once by playing the victim. This time the facts were merciless. Science did not care about motives. Blood tests did not respond to tears. For the first time she felt cornered in a way she could not talk her way out of. Liz faced her own reckoning. Some people praised her courage. Others questioned her loyalty. A few whispered that she had waited too long. Liz accepted it all. She knew she would carry guilt for not seeing sooner, for trusting longer than she should have. But she also knew that stopping now would have been worse. The line between compassion and complicity had nearly vanished. She had chosen to redraw it. As days passed, Drew began to show signs of improvement. Small movements. Flickers of awareness. Doctors called it encouraging but cautious. When he finally opened his eyes, the first face he saw was Lucas. Confusion clouded his expression, followed by pain and then a quiet understanding that something significant had changed. He asked about Willow. Lucas hesitated before answering honestly. Drew closed his eyes again, not in shock but in weary acceptance. Somewhere deep down he had already known. The trial that followed captured the attention of the entire town. This time Willow did not walk in draped in sympathy. She walked in under the weight of evidence that told a clear story. The missing vial, the blood analysis, the timeline Liz had pieced together with methodical care. Witness by witness the illusion crumbled. Willow tried to speak of love twisted by betrayal, of desperation born from humiliation. The judge listened but did not waver. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Guilty. The word landed with finality. Willow did not scream. She did not cry. She simply stared ahead as if watching a version of herself fade away. In that moment she understood that her freedom had ended not when Liz found the vial, but when she chose revenge over restraint. Outside the courthouse, Liz stood with Trina and Kai. None of them smiled. Justice did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy and necessary. Alexis joined them briefly, offering a nod of respect rather than words. They had all been part of this story in different ways, bound by secrets and choices that finally reached their conclusion. Drew continued his recovery slowly. There were setbacks and victories measured in inches rather than miles. He learned to walk again with help. He learned to trust again with caution. The scars remained, both visible and hidden. Yet there was also a sense of clarity that came with survival. He had been forced to confront the damage left behind by his own actions, as well as the actions of others. Months later, Liz passed Willow in the prison visiting room one last time. Their eyes met across the distance. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The story between them was finished. Not neatly. Not without pain. But finished all the same. Life in Port Charles moved forward as it always did, reshaped by the fallout of truth revealed. Some wounds healed. Others became part of the landscape. What remained was a lesson etched into memory. Performances can fool crowds. Silence can delay justice. But eventually the smallest detail, a missing vial, a misplaced emotion, can bring even the most carefully built life crashing down.